The views expressed in this podcast are those of the panelists and do not necessarily reflect the views of U.S. Money Reserve.
Welcome to America's Gold Authority podcast. Today I'm joined by the 35th Director of the United States Mint and former Chief of Staff at the U.S. Treasury, Mr. Philip Deal, and U.S. Money Reserve Director of Education, Brad Chastain. Finally, joining us is Patrick Brunson, Sales Director at U.S. Money Reserve. And today we're going to be discussing digital currency and taking a deep dive into crypto and cybercrime. Gentlemen, welcome. Let's get right into this. When we talk about, gold, and we talk about the economy, we talk about all the things that are going on right now, let's talk about this digital age because things are changing. Mm-hmm. There's a digital age here, right? CBDCs and digital currencies. That's scary for some people. Mm-hmm. I talked to a gentleman the other day. He was 75 years old, and he doesn't understand it.
Yeah.
He doesn't understand the concept of a digital currency. He can't get his arms around that. Mm-hmm. Let's dig into this for a little bit, please. So, Brad, digital currency, CBDCs, what are they?
Yeah, there's a couple of different kinds. When you say CBDC, specifically that stands for central bank digital currencies. So this would be a currency that is issued by a central bank. Okay. Just like our dollars or euros or anything like that, but in a digital format.
Right.
Using the blockchain, like many people are familiar with Bitcoin.
Sure.
And so come back to some of the concerns there. The other side is just outright cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and things that are not controlled by any government or anything else, right? So they are two sort of separate things here. Mm-hmm. CBDCs, specifically with central banks, there's many countries working on them around the globe. Right now, when you do transactions with the bank, it's not private. Your bank knows what you're buying and selling, right? It's only private if you're going and using physical cash somewhere, which hardly anybody does.
Right.
But it's not in a centralized place where government has easy access to it. And a CBDC ultimately gives that.
So that goes to this next question, right? People, the idea behind gold, at least for many, many years, was the idea was that if I buy gold, it's a tangible asset. Nobody knows I have it. It's mine. I can own it, keep it at my home, at my safe. Is that a motivation for a lot of people for why they?
Absolutely. And that's especially with the generations like the baby boomers who they're not used to digital currencies, right, and cryptos. It's all just completely, it's a phenomenon to them. Mm-hmm. They just cannot comprehend it. And so they're getting to the point where they do want to have control of their own money. And with all the instability in the banking system, like we were talking about before, and the lack of confidence in the FDIC, a lot of people just don't see a point in keeping all their money in the bank anymore.
Sure.
And so moving to a tangible asset that they know it's going to be there tomorrow, the day after that, and the day after that. They can't confidently say that about their money in the bank or the stock market anymore.
So how do I know my money's going to be there? Because with this digital age comes cybercrime. Mm-hmm. Over the last several years, some major hacks. Scary stuff. I think, if I recall, 343 million victims have been exposed to cybercrime. Over 4.5 million on average per attack. Ransoms, all kinds of things, right? So what gives?
Yeah. Well, we have state actors behind some of this, which we have North Koreans, Russians, Chinese, Iranians, others.
Sure.
Name all the usual suspects, and who are sponsoring these attacks and are actually funding their governments through state-sponsored attacks.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have the common, criminal hacker who's getting $1 million here and $1 million there, or who are holding companies, organizations, ransom.
Sure.
So yes, it's an increasing concern, and it's baffling that companies have not been more aggressive in protecting themselves against hacking. And I think part of the reason is because they consider that risk to be a cost of doing business. And when they get hacked, they pass it on to their customers, or their stockholders take a hit. But it's not, the parasite hasn't killed the host yet. And so I'm not optimistic that this is going to improve. What I'm actually more concerned about is state actors who plan hostile military action and use cyber warfare as an adjunct to military attacks. And under that sort of scenario, you're talking about broad economic, societal effects that could crush an economy for days, weeks, or months at a time.
That's a scary thought.
It is scary, and in a way, we've seen a physical example of that with the pandemic,
Right.
COVID-19. I mean, COVID-19 is a physical virus as opposed to a computer virus.
Sure.
But there are absolutely credible scenarios that would make COVID-19, the economic dislocation of COVID-19, much more severe and happen much faster.
So
I want gold in that situation. I want to have physical asset,
Sure.
my ability to put my hands on at least a portion of my assets.
Right. I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
what I've come to find is that when it comes to cyber attacks, it's very, very difficult for any company, for that matter, to be proactive, because most of these cyber attacks come in the form of an attack that was never done before. And that's what a lot of these hackers will do, is find a loophole that nobody's discovered, and then that's how they commit their offense. And we're always left being reactive to it, to make sure
I think that's what Philip was just talking about, right?
So if that's the case, again, that's where the trust comes into play with the financial system and the banks. And I think that one of the biggest things that I think people are missing is, let's say the plug gets pulled and it goes dark for a day, and then it gets turned back on. It's not like everything's just going to go right back to normal because everything's turned back on. Everything has to be, it's everything. One system's got to start before another. There's a sequence of the way things have to work, and I don't think people are really realizing what that can look like.
Well, in this day and age, AI is becoming a real thing. How do you know who to trust anymore?
Yeah.
AI is a scary. I mean, there's benefits to it. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, tremendous.
Okay? But
potential.
the concerns are more persuasive and powerful, and you no longer need to have a live person to scam you. Fake videos, fake emails, fake phone calls.
Yeah, fake phone calls.
That's a scary thought. It's happening.
Yeah.
Where are we headed with this? How do you combat that?
Yeah, and the greatest threat, I think, is that we come to trust nothing. Nothing is credible, because we can't tell the difference between what's real and what's not real. And that is the horrific scenario where nothing is trustworthy. I mean, it's like, how do you trust a new person you've met?
Right.
You have multiple interactions with them.
Right.
You use judgment.
Right.
You maybe do a Google search.
Yeah.
You do your homework,
Right.
and you get to know them.
There's usually signs, though, right? Usually these AI scams are relatively new companies. They pop up. They operating out of a garage somewhere.
Absolutely.
That's
right.
Copying. They're very efficient at copying legitimate websites as well, making them indistinguishable. That's the way that they're being used most recently. These things are developing very, very fast.
Right.
It won't even be it'll look exactly like your bank website and
Yes.
things like that, and they're able to replicate that. People have been able to do that for a long time, but it's been very time consuming with somebody having to do the programming and all of that, and AI can spit hundreds of these things out really quickly.
Yeah. I have represented the company in regulatory proceedings in which fly-by-night operators have come into a state and have ripped people off.
Sure.
And I come in as one of the good companies, representing the good companies, and saying, don't paint us all with the same brush.
Right.
And establish, and I was a regulator earlier in my career in telecommunications at the Texas Public Utility Commission. I can talk to regulators. I worked on the Hill. I can talk to people in legislative. It's a trust building exercise. And the people who get taken in these transactions are people who haven't done their homework. I mean, these companies are typically, you don't have to do a lot of homework to figure out, I'm not sure I should trust these people.
Right.
So anybody who really is intent on doing their homework at this stage of the game of impersonation of companies can find out who we are.
Right.
And so, I mean, in terms of, obviously we can't do business without gaining the trust of customers. And it's one of the reasons why we're sitting around these tables and why you host so many of these is, people get to know us through the screen, listen to us talk, see who we are, gauge who we are.
Yeah, it says a lot by having a mint director as the president of our company. I mean, you could have gone to work anywhere you wanted to. You chose this company and you explained why.
Yeah.
And that creates a lot of confidence and credibility. You were going to say something, please.
So yeah, being on the phone, you do run into that a lot. You run into people who they're not sure who to trust.
Right.
And I think, for me, I've always encouraged my account executives, if you want to let the customer go shop around, let them do it. Here's why. A lot of the other companies in the industry, they may deal with one or two types of products.
Sure.
The reason why a lot of consumers gravitate back to us is because we deal with just about every product in the gold industry, and we try to make sure that our clients are acquiring the right product for their motivations of getting involved to begin with.
Right.
And all of that starts with the education. And when we can educate them on all the different products that you can acquire, you're making the right decision, and you can trust the company as opposed to another one that's trying to get you to buy their type of inventory regardless of the motivation or not.
Sure.
That makes sense?
No, it makes complete sense, and those are all great answers, and thank you for that. I know that's a tough question. I want to shift gears here for a minute, and I want to talk about crypto. Let's talk about the digital crypto. Now, since 2011, Bitcoin has lost more than 50% of its value 7 times. Now, prior to the show, you were sharing something with me that just blew my mind, and I'll let you talk about this here. But crypto exchanges remain online all the time, right? So what happens if an exchange goes down? We'll get to that question in a minute. But I want to talk about, you were sharing something with me prior to the show about how every time it's corrected, what were you saying?
Yeah, and looking at historical returns, because we look at it in terms of potential assets and diversification,
right,
as big as it's gotten, and comparing it with gold and things like that, and there's been 380% drawdowns, 7 times it was over 50%. If you look at the 380% drawdowns that have occurred and the bull markets that have happened in between each one, because everybody knows the growth has been exponential.
Sure.
The first bull market it had went from basically nothing. It was tens of thousands of percent return, right?
Right.
And 80% pullback. And then the next was about 72% less return than the previous bull market, which was still thousands of percent return, still astronomical. Sure. 80% pullback. Then another one that was about 72% less than the previous one. So there's this diminishing return curve that you see with these pullbacks, and it's now to the point where if you saw another 80% drawdown in Bitcoin's price, then the next bull run, if it had another 72% less return than it had previously, would not even get back to the break-even point.
Wow. That's what you were sharing with me before the show.
It would actually fall well short, basically back to the top of where this last one started previous year. So,
wow.
With the adoption, I'm not sure if we'll still see the same drawdowns, but certainly won't see the same exponential growth because there's just not enough money out there. It'd have to come from too many other places out there to make the asset classes that worth that much compared to other assets out there. But
Talking about money, people have lost a lot of money in crypto.
Yeah,
I mean, yes, they've made money, right? But there's been a lot of money lost.
Oh,
If one of these
and
exchanges goes down,
you'd think everybody had made money.
No,
because
but-
those
yeah.
are the great stories to
Sure.
tell. The people who went from rags to riches.
Right.
Who but
how many people have gone from riches to rags?
Yeah,
man?
and a lot of
in a
people, and
heartbeat.
especially a lot of people who came in late to the game. So yeah, you don't hear those stories so much.
What happens if an exchange goes down? What happens if an exchange goes down? I mean, we've seen it happen, right? Some of these exchanges have been wiped out.
Yeah.
Hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, look at FTX. I mean, these investors were completely bamboozled, right?
Yeah.
They lost billions of dollars. But what happens if an exchange goes down? Is there someone there to bail you out?
Nope.
not really.
Not that I know of.
Nope.
There's no FDIC
not an
insurance
FDIC.
or anything like that.
No, there's not. And this is one of the things I object to. I'm a skeptic. I'm a crypto skeptic.
Yeah.
And I mean, I do wish I had bought early.
Wait a minute, let me repeat. You're a skeptic, but you wish you would have bought it.
No,
Okay.
I do. I wish it's more horses. But I'm a skeptic because the story of crypto is a story of, it's a fiction of legitimacy, in which they have sought to cast crypto as as a legitimate substitute for nation-issued currency, and they have constantly promoted the idea that crypto is going to be used in all these common day-to-day interactions, when what we know is it has had in the past two essential purposes: a speculative vehicle and a means of exchange to support illicit transactions. That's the two roles that it's played. And so, and that doesn't mean that's the only role they will ever play, but, and if people ask me, well, should I buy crypto? Should I invest in crypto?
Sure. What's
And
your
I
answer?
said, and my answer is sure, if you understand it's a purely speculative play. Don't figure it's in a separate asset class with a whole different risk profile.
Right.
And if you go in like that, then okay. But in a balanced portfolio, for that high risk investment, you need to have other elements of your portfolio that balance that. And gold is a perfect match as a balance to crypto. They can go together in a portfolio.
Right.
And it's not as though crypto competes with gold as an asset class or as currency or as a store of value, because anything that loses 80% of its value or 50% of its value is not, by definition, a store of value.
Right.
Yeah, and to give you an example of fitting into a portfolio, BlackRock has Bitcoin ETFs that they promote and sell. And their advice is literally 2% of the portfolio.
The total portfolio.
Of a total portfolio. Very tiny portion of an
of
entire, and they are pushing and trying to get people to purchase, and they are still only recommending 2% of a portfolio.
So
because
why
of
has
that
there
risk.
then been this adoption then with the digital currency? Because there's over 134 countries that represent more than 98% of the GDP globally that are now adopting or looking into some digital currency. So how does a digital
A central bank, a national
correct,
digital
right?
currency. Yeah.
How does that differ than a cryptocurrency?
Yeah, it's issued by the central bank, so it's on their balance sheet.
So does that
just
legitimize
like
it
physical?
then?
What's that?
Does that legitimize it then because it's a central bank as opposed to it just being created out of there?
From that standpoint, it would. In fact, the way that the European Union is implementing a digital euro here, probably in the next couple of years, they've done a lot of work on it and are looking at partners for doing it.
Right.
It is fundamentally, from an economics standpoint and the way that the banking system works, no different than a physical piece of paper euro.
Okay.
Like it literally, in fact, they're exchangeable. When you deposit a physical euro, you don't have a euro anymore. You have a bank deposit.
Got it.
And when you deposit a digital euro to the bank, you no longer have a digital euro. You have a bank deposit. It's the exact same thing. If you pay a business with a digital euro, it's going to go to their bank. They're not even going to be able to hold them. It's just going to go through them. They're going to limit how much people can take out because it would be easy to have bank runs and then people would draw too much because you're not going to carry around a lot of cash, but loading up a digital wallet is very easy. And so that could disrupt the banking system. So they're going to have lots of regulations around that, but it is fundamentally no different from an economics or way the monetary system works from printing a physical one. The issue, though, is for Europeans is going to be the privacy. Right. Unlike the physical piece of paper, euro, that is going to be on the central bank balance sheet. Every account will be. And they are not anonymizing, they're pseudonymizing, but so they can uncover who it is, even though it's not just their name sitting there. Right. So it's easy for them to get. But that's the big concern there for that sort of thing is the privacy and the control that it gives and the insight that it will have into how their citizens are using their money.
Gentlemen, please, you were going to say.
But the European Central Bank, like the other government central banks that are exploring this and very seriously exploring it, probably are headed toward implementation, are doing this because it's more efficient. It makes economic transactions between individuals and banks and among banks and the central bank much more efficient. Is that right?
It can be, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So as we get ready to wrap up today, you guys have provided a lot of insight, and I want to say thank you for being on the show. But I want to ask one last question, and I want to give each of you time to answer this question. I'll start with you, Pat, right? And the question is, why gold?
Loaded question.
Oh, it's the reason I asked it.
So, number one, I would say that in a world where everything's going digital, it provides some safety there. You can see, touch it, and feel it. It has intrinsic value, right? You can't just make it out of thin air, right? It's one of those scenarios where we, as stated earlier, we're in uncharted waters with a lot of things. The banks, these bubbles, the everything bubble that everybody likes to call it. We are in uncharted waters to the point where some people were looking at cryptocurrencies as a safe haven asset, but I think it's already proven that it's not really a safe haven asset, right? So the safety that people are looking for falls within the assets that you just can't make out of thin air. And it all boils down to supply and demand in that aspect. They can print dollars till the end of time. They can essentially create another cryptocurrency or a meme coin. There's all kinds of stuff that they can create out of thin air, but you cannot do it with gold. And throughout civilization, Philip's talked about this before, we've seen currencies collapse. Go to the currency graveyard that some people call it. Even during trade wars, the last thing standing has always been gold. And it's always been the asset or the form of money that every civilization has fallen back on if they've ever needed to start over. But in the sense of the short term, with gold going up the way that it is, it's because of what we're seeing with our currencies and how things are being inflated, like we talked about earlier. This inflation, in my opinion, we're not even close to being done with the inflationary repercussions from all the money that's been created since the pandemic. And I think, I remember for the longest time when gold was sitting at $1,200, $1,300 an ounce, where is this thing really going to go? We were talking about $2,000 an ounce like it was a fairy tale. But sure enough, it surpassed it, and here we are knocking on the door of 3,000. I think 5,000 is not that, unreachable, but in the short term, as a form of protection from all the manipulation and the inflated bubbles that we have, gold is probably one of the only assets that you can really protect the money that you're going to need to hold on to for the long term. And if somebody else knows of something else that you can buy, let me know.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Brad, your take?
Yeah, I think it for me, it has to do with the uncertainty of the future. We're entering a time where we're going to see this exponential change that is like nothing human history has ever seen. When my 4-year-old and 7-year-old are my age,
right,
their life is going to be nothing like mine. It's hard as a parent to know how to prepare them for careers, what kind of jobs are going to be available at that point in time.
Right.
The entire economy is going to operate very, very differently at that point in time. I don't think there ever has been a time in history where such a shift is taken place in just one generation as to what we're going to see over the next very near future, literally by the time they're 40. And so for me, it has to do with that uncertainty and what can I do? I don't know how all of the AI technology and robotics is going to play out and how it's going to transform the economy. I'm try to study and learn so that I can anticipate it as best as possible. But the thing that I know I can do is help them be financially more free. I don't mean like financially free where they never have to do anything type thing, but financially well off enough to have flexibility to have options and adapt. Whether that mean, when normal labor and knowledge work is not needed so much anymore, whether that means investment opportunities and providing capital to that world, right? Or education that comes along later that we would never have anticipated was needed to thrive in that world. When you have the assets to be able to have that flexibility, I think that'll go a long way. And when central banks are looking at this asset as something that they need to hold more, those that print money to help bolster their nation's futures going forward, I love owning the asset that they are looking to position themselves for the future.
Well said. Well said. Philip?
What Brad says really resonates with me. My wife and I grew up, my wife of almost 51 years, we grew up under very modest circumstances. Her life was even more modest than mine. And we didn't, I don't think her family would have ever considered themselves poor, but looking back on it, yeah, pretty poor, and a small town in Arkansas. And we came up through the world by our wits and no financial safety net whatsoever. And the older you get and your kids go to school and you have, everybody who's been in this situation understands the fear that wrecks you in the middle of the night when you don't have a safety net. I want to spare my kids and my grandkids from that gnawing fear. I don't want them to experience that. And so, I'm a little bit older than these other guys. So, but my sons are independent and are making their way in the world. I have 3 granddaughters who face the same uncertainty that your children do, and it's impossible for me to imagine the world that they're going to be in. But I'd like to provide them the resources, like Brad has said, not so they'll never have to work again. I want them to work. I think work is good for the soul. and all kinds of work. It's disciplining. And I want them to work, but I want them to escape that gnawing fear that wakes them up in the middle of the night.
Right. Well said, gentlemen.
Well said.
Well said. Thank you for the time today. I'll give you my take here. I've listened to you guys, and you guys have given some great answers. So thank you for providing the insight. And for those of you watching at home, if you're considering precious metals as part of your portfolio, call the men and women here at U.S. Money Reserve. They'll sit down with you. They'll send you a free gold kit. They'll walk you through the different options, show you how easy it is to get involved. They're knowledgeable individuals, and they're supported by experts who are able to give them great insight. And so we want to thank you for joining us on another episode of America's Gold Authority podcast. Blessings to all of you. Thank you again. Have a great day.
The markets for coins are unregulated. Prices can rise or fall and carry some risks. The company is not affiliated with the U.S. government or the U.S. Mint. Past performance of the coin or the market cannot predict future performance. All calls recorded for quality assurance. Offer void where prohibited.